Don't get any pictures yet. There we go. All right, welcome all. I'd like to call to order the Finance Committee of the City of Palo Alto of April 7th, 2026. If the clerk would please call the roll.
Chair Lowing,
Present.
Councilmember Liu,
Here.
Councilmember Burt,
Here.
all present.
Great, thank you. We have two items on the agenda for this meeting today. The first action item being a council adoption of a resolution amending utility rate schedule D1, which is storm and surface water drainage, and electrification caps. But first, is there any public comment on any items that are not on the agenda?
Yes. Yes, we currently have one request to speak. Our first speaker is Miana. And give me one moment, Miana. Miana, you should be able to unmute yourself. Miana W, if you'd like to.
My name's Adam. I'm about to make a public comment on the roads, that the roads needs to be more like people driving like too fast. And what they need to do is put more speed bumps. And I don't have to make more speed bumps to make it even more stronger. And I need them to do like more construction work, like just like what they did in London before.
Okay, thank you. That all?
That concludes public comment on items not on the agenda.
Okay, fine. Then we'll go to staff for the first item, and who's going to make the presentation? Okay.
So Kara North, Assistant Director of Public Works, will take this.
Hi, I'm Kara North. I'm the Assistant Director of Public Works. So this item is to request the Finance Committee support for updating the stormwater management fee for fiscal year 2027 based on the annual CPI adjustment allowed under the 2017 voter approved measure. You can go to the next slide. The local CPI increase is a 3%. So the monthly fee would increase from 1761 to 1814 per the ERU, an increase of 53 cents, and it will be effective of July 1st of 2026. This fee supports storm drain capital improvements, maintenance, and water quality programs. You can go to the next slide. Several ballot measure projects are now completed and 4 more are in construction, with completion expected in late 2026. And additional projects are planned for fiscal year 2028 and onward. Construction costs have increased significantly since 2017, so staff will reassess funding needs and project priorities during the fiscal year 2028 project process. And then the next slide. And the proposed adjustment adds roughly $270,000 in annual revenue to the stormwater fund. And the staff requests the committee recommend council adoption of the updated rate schedule. And we are here for any questions.
And it's all started in April 11th of 17.
Correct, is voter approved.
Yeah. Okay. Questions or comments for staff? Yeah, Pat?
So this is pretty straightforward as things go. I just, the one project that is, I think it's the Center Avenue capacity upgrade, that's the one that really would benefit reduction in flooding off of San Francisco Creek. Is that correct?
Senior Engineer, Public Works Engineering. Center Drive is the one that would pick up flows that run in city streets. It probably the one closest to San Francisco Creek, correct?
Well, not just closest to, but as we've had flooding incidents, I think this is the one that we anticipated would reduce the street flooding from, and I'm not sure whether it was, if we get overflow from the creek, that the storm water system can then have some of that overflow go into the storm system.
Correct. And we need Hamilton Avenue constructed first before we can do Center.
Okay, and the timing on that is what?
Hamilton is currently under construction. We're slated to be completed by the end of this year. We'll begin the design next year, early spring, and hopefully complete the design and award the contract in the fall.
Okay, and that's for the center?
Correct.
And Hamilton is,
Under construction,
and would be completed when?
the end of this year.
Okay, I'm just
2026.
thinking in terms of the wet season.
Yeah, no, it's in terms of the wet season. Unfortunately, it's staffing at this point. We're working on three other projects. Fourth one we'll be picking up also Allister. So we're doing a little bit more work on Allister to actually that will alleviate the main flooding that occurred in the New Year's Eve event.
Oh, okay.
And that's under rehab.
And that the time frame for that one is what?
We're going to award contract before the end of this fiscal year, and we've got to do the work during the summer.
Good. And are the Crescent Park and Duvernay St. Francis neighborhood groups being updated all the time?
Yes.
Great.
I think they see the work. They're watching us.
But they know the
but
schedule of completion?
Uh,
They've been given those updates?
we provide updates as needed, I think, to residents that are walk by, but I haven't seen any issues. But we have in the past disseminated before the project began.
Okay, well, I think that they have an active neighborhood group focused on storm flooding threats, and I think they'd really appreciate getting real timeline and what would happen. Great.
We can do another reach.
Okay, thank you. On that note, I'd be glad to move the staff recommendation.
Yeah, you did a great job on that quiz you just gave you too.
Yeah.
Go ahead and we'll see if George has any comments.
No real comments. I appreciate the updates. I understand that we'll have a deeper dive come budget season. I had a few bigger picture finance questions. I was sort of chit-chatting a little bit before the meeting about what the state of our reserves look like, what the total revenue looks like, what sort of pipeline of projects looks like, and whether 3% is enough. But I understand that there are constraints on increasing beyond CPI. And so there'll be a time and a place for a bigger strategic deep dive on all of these projects. But for now, I think this is extremely routine and sensible and something we should just go ahead with.
Okay, I'll second the motion. And then can we have a vote, please?
Before we go to a vote, Councilmember Lowin, would you like to hear public comment on item 1?
I sure would. I didn't realize it was. Go ahead.
Yes. We currently have one request to speak. Darren H., you should now be able to unmute yourself and provide public comment.
Hi, I'd like to make a public comment on something that sometimes I see people fighting and the police need to do their more job to keep an eye on the pickpockets here. And it's really frustrating, and it's not like it's like nothing, it's like something that belongs to the
That concludes public comment.
Thank you.
Councilmember Burt? Councilmember Liu?
Yes.
Chair Lowing?
Yes,
Motion carries.
thank you. Thanks to staff. Second item, we have a new cast of staff.
So while they're coming up, we have staff from Planning and Development Services to talk about various fees and the nexus between electrification state caps and subsidies. So I will turn it over to Steve Guagliardo, Senior Management Analyst in Planning and Development Services.
Clearly a little rusty since I've been in this room chatting with y'all. Steve Guagliardo, Senior Management Analyst for Planning and Development Services, joined by Sarah McCree, Chief Building Official George Hoyt. Good afternoon, Chair Lowing, council members, nice to be back in a committee meeting. Unfortunately, I don't think this item will be quite as fast as the last one, but we do hope we've teed it up to be straightforward and engage in a discussion about what our options are related to electrification permits, state caps, how they apply, and what subsidies we may wish to apply. If you could go to the next slide. So our purpose here tonight is to discuss potential subsidies and sources for those subsidies for various electrification activities. The reason we're here especially is in context of our current financial forecast. We hope to receive feedback on the potential subsidies as they relate to the city's overall financial framework, so we can incorporate that feedback into the FY27 operating budget and the development of the FY27 municipal fee schedule. We've divided the conversation up into 3 general buckets. One is related to solar and energy storage. This is abbreviated as PV for photovoltaic, or ESS for energy storage systems. These have been limited by a state cap that applies to the city of Palo Alto and limits what we can charge without a written finding. We'll discuss more about what our options there as we go through the PowerPoint, but just noting that that's the first bucket of conversation. The second bucket relates to additional electrification activities, including new electric service and installation of HVAC systems. And the final bucket relates to electric vehicle charging stations. For each of these 3 areas, there was conversation with the Finance Committee last year, which we'll talk more about in the background section. And we also received multiple comments and feedback from applicants for each of these permits related to how the City of Palo Alto's rates and permit fees relate to neighboring jurisdictions, as well as the state caps. These also come into play when we talk about compliance and the need for our partners in building, fire, and other areas of the organization to understand where these services are being installed throughout the city to preserve life, safety, and property. If we can go to the next slide. We'll talk about the background a little bit. We've talked about the FY27 financial forecast fairly extensively with council, so we won't belabor it too much here today, but it's important to just highlight that we're forecasting a significant deficit in FY27 of approximately $14.9 million in the general fund. There's various options to balance that deficit, including exploring new revenue sources, reductions in the general fund, capital improvement fund reductions, drawing on contributions from our pension funding plan, and use of stabilization reserves. The conversation we're having here today is also one of those areas that could potentially help close the gap. At the moment, the state of California applies a state cap to certain solar and energy storage system fees. This prohibits development services from reaching full cost recovery and lowers general fund revenues overall. So if we were to take action through discussion tonight and make a recommendation to full city council to close that gap somewhat through mechanisms we'll discuss, that would be to the good for the general fund as we go forward. Go to next slide. Last year, before Finance Committee, the Planning and Development Services Group underwent a fee study to inform our fee levels for the FY26 municipal fee schedule. This aligned cost of services for various permits and activities with the cost of providing those services. Development Services operates as a cost recovery fee-backed entity. This means that we don't subsidize the activities generally and ensures that applicants are paying the full price for the activities and services that are being provided. However, through the April conversation with Finance Committee last year, they identified as a policy goal related to SCAP that they wanted to pursue subsidizing electrification fees. These subsidies were inadvertently not applied as part of the FY26 municipal fee development. Additionally, as mentioned previously, the financial forecast has changed significantly since April 2025. So this afternoon/tonight, we're here to center a conversation on those fees and what our next steps can be across the 3 categories that we just discussed. You can go to the next slide. The largest and most significant of these is the photovoltaic and ESS systems that are limited by state caps. So California state law limits what cities can charge for these permits without a written finding. It says, here's the limit, here's what you can charge for these activities, regardless of what it actually costs you to provide those fees in terms of review by staff, in terms of inspections, etc., unless you do a written finding. Because we're limited to the state caps because we don't have a written finding, we're limited to the state caps for solar and ESS. This brings us into alignment with neighboring jurisdictions and addresses concerns we've received from residents and other applicants about what our fees are and how they exceeded the state caps. Many of these made their way to council inbox. We've addressed these. Refunds are being issued for the approximately 80 applications that were inadvertently mischarged, and we're through approximately 40 of those, with the remaining 40 being processed as we speak and hoping to conclude in the next month or so. Charging the state cap limit is consistent with direction received from the 2025 Finance Committee in subsidizing the activity, but it does prevent development services from reaching full cost recovery. It essentially means that we are subsidizing it from the general fund without action by the council. So there's tables that we can get into and we can discuss what those fees are, what the subsidy level looks like, and what our options are going forward. But the main thing to highlight for discussion with the Finance Committee is that the recent fee study we did last year provides the necessary documentation that we need should we choose to pursue that written finding that the state cap allows. That could allow us to achieve full cost recovery by charging the applicant the amount it takes us to process the application, and then we could offer rebates through utility programs to lower the applicant cost. This would reflect the interest expressed by Finance Committee last April in subsidizing electrification activities, simply shifting the source of that subsidy from the general fund to utilities programs and eligible utility funding. You can go to the next slide. So that's really what we want to focus our conversation on here tonight is, do we want to follow the state caps and limits for photovoltaic and energy storage systems, or do we want to pursue a written finding that would allow the city to exceed that cap? If we do want to exceed that cap, do we want to go up to 100% cost recovery, or do we want to find somewhere in between those two? So what level of cost recovery should be pursued? And then regardless of what level of cost recovery should be pursued, how do we want to subsidize it? Do we want to subsidize it through the general fund, or do we want it to be rebated through eligible utility program funding? That's for the state cap fees. The state cap does not currently apply to additional subsidies that were recommended by the Finance Committee related to new electric service and HVAC permits. So those questions are also open to the Finance Committee of, do we want to continue to pursue those policy and electrification goals balanced against our financial framework that we're looking at, or do we want to subsidize it? If we do want to subsidize it, what should the funding source be? The general fund or eligible utilities program funding? And then the final piece discussed in the memo is related to electrical vehicle charging stations. So this is one that we did a bunch of sharpening of our pencils with in collaboration with our partners in the fire department and elsewhere throughout the organization to understand what our options were for lowering the cost for electrical vehicle charging stations. This has been a source of consternation among applicants about how much it costs to install a new level 1 charger for residential installations in Palo Alto, especially compared to neighboring jurisdictions. It's also one that we have great interest in monitoring from a preservation of life, safety, and property perspective. We want to know where people are installing these chargers so that if fire gets a call and needs to respond, they know what they're responding to and what's on file. It also ensures that these are being installed appropriately and correctly. So our chief building official took point, looked at the current process, worked with partners throughout the organization, and we're pleased to present a streamlined EVS charging process for applications. This involves primarily inspections from building inspectors for residential level 1 chargers, and as long as everything passes muster there, fire would not need to be involved and go out into the field for those inspections. This aligns with neighboring jurisdictions and lowers the overall cost for these applications. With that, staff is available for questions and clarifications as necessary.
I think one question that should be on the table and public to hear it as well is the necessary documentation relative to our recent fee study. Can you comment on what the new fee study, it's the cost of service study?
Right. So this was the fee study that we did last year that informed the development of the FY26 fees. And so this was analysis that was done that looked at the time spent by staff on each application, on each type of permit, and came up with a calculation to determine the appropriate cost recovery fee for that. So this is available, and this does pass muster according to the state's regulations on what could be used as appropriate documentation for those fees.
So what's the incremental dollars? You can either give it to us in the aggregate, which would be better, or, per application.
Sure. So overall, the impact of,
So council member, if you look at packet page 14, the packet page 14 reflects in table 1, the fees. and then the subsidy or cost recovery, and then ultimately the potential annual value of that subsidy. You can see the lion's share is in the single family systems, 10 kW or less, and the other single family systems greater than 10 kW.
And this was all based on the information we had available at the time the report was initially prepared. We were since able to do, so if you look at this table, you can see it looks at the number of permits issued in 24 and then extrapolated on that if the same activity levels, and that's what you see for the potential annual value of that subsidy. Subsequent to that, we were able to look at permits that have been issued through March, which gives us 9 months of data in the current fiscal year. And if you did a straight line projection, you would get a slightly more refined number for the current fiscal year impact, and that would be about $226,000 for the solar PV and ESS systems. For the electric service and HVAC permits, it would be about $75,000. We've seen much lower activity in the electric service and HVAC permits this current year than we did in 2024.
Do we have any other questions? And then we'll go to public comment and then do comments from us.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
So I want to make sure I understand one scenario that you're suggesting is that we would do the findings to allow us to go above the state and then subsidize it afterwards. So I'm not quite following why we'd go that sequence.
Right. I appreciate the opportunity to clarify. So that would keep the funds in the general fund at their fully authorized level. So what it takes to provide the service in the general fund, we would do the written finding, we would get up to full cost recovery. The applicant would pay that money upfront. So for a single family system that was 10 kilowatts or less, they would pay the full $1,481. Then they would be rebated $1,031 after the fact through eligible utilities program funding.
And those eligible utility program funds, what are they?
So these would be non-rate revenue funds that you have been using for various SCAP programs, like your low carbon fuel or your bucket 1 and bucket 3 recs, I think. And I'm getting nods from staff.
Okay. So I thought that was probably the case. If we use those funds for this purpose, what does that preclude or reduce as an alternative use of those funds?
Absolutely. Jonathan or Alan?
I would defer to our utilities director on the use of these for renewable energy and what the potential impact is there. But with respect to electrification, this is equivalent to about the incentives for about 25 whole home electrification projects, so HVAC and water heating. So that's about the scale that we're talking about.
And is there a dollar amount that we have in that fund? And is that an accumulated dollar amount or an annual? Have we been spending
Well,
what we've had?
we need to think of that as so there are accumulated funds in the reserves. I think an important question would be whether we're thinking about this as an ongoing expense, which would affect the long-term budget planning for the SCAP differently, but would be about that scale annually, about 25 homes worth.
But and the fund renewal that we get. So we got that many dollars. How many dollars per year come to us from those funds? And that are those revenues that are relatively consistent, or do they fluctuate quite a bit?
There's a lot of uncertainty in those revenues. So the scale is in the ballpark of 10 million per year, but it is also earmarked for quite a few things, and many of those special revenue funds are limited for specific purposes. And then some of that, some of the revenue sources that make up those $10 million are both expected to decline over time over the next 5 years. And then there's some uncertainty in the legislature about, and I appreciate our utilities director is coming up to talk a little bit about the changes to the cap and invest program. And, we're looking at potential regulatory changes that are coming that may come in the next couple of years that could constrict our ability to spend those funds even further.
So just wanted to reference in the report. So there are several buckets of available funds that are non-rate revenues. As the Assistant City Manager mentioned, the council has taken an action to use what we call bucket 1, bucket 3 REX monies for local decarbonization projects. So that would be under the direction of City Council to use those funds. Those are the most easily used for programs such as these. The other restricted type of funding would be the cap and invest programs for gas and for the electric utility. Those were extended to 2045, but those are declining over time. They're designed to decline over time. So there are requirements and restrictions on how those are used. And as the Assistant City Manager mentioned, there's low carbon fuel standard credits. Those are also under a CARB, I believe, in terms of the requirements. 50% of that needs to be used for low income programs. So there are some requirements that we have to meet. So as Jonathan mentioned, there are certain available fundings that we have, but there is levers that we can pull on. What we typically do on the utility side is provide rebates to the customers. Under the programs Palo Alto currently has, we're kind of top tier in terms of those dollar amounts. If there was a recommendation to use more of those funds, then we would have to look at what would that mean for the other programs that we're moving forward with. So there is a balancing, on what levers you pull and on how you use those funds.
And on the anticipated revenue from the cap and invest, when the legislature this last year set up the new scheme, one of the things they did was high-speed rail, instead of getting 25%, they got a flat $1 billion based upon some prior trends of $4 billion, but the total amount has declined. So is it correct that not only the percentage that would have gone to programs like this is down, but because high-speed rail gets that off the top, it's an even greater step decline for FY27?
Yeah, so let me speak to that because I didn't answer that question. But so for cap and invest for the gas utility, the investor-owned utilities, those cap and invest monies were taken away from the investor-owned utilities and ported over to the electric side, and those are coming as direct rebates to those customers. For public-owned utilities like ourselves, the City of Vernon, City of Long Beach, that money still is with the utility, and we use those for decarbonization programs. So that's cap and invest natural gas. Cap and invest for electric, we are projecting to see a decrease as much as 40% of the dollar amounts that we were receiving in the previous years, and that will be declining. We don't know the answers to that yet. So if there was a desire to look at some of those funding sources, we would work with the climate action teams, see where the monies will be flowing, and then see how much funds are available and what that would mean. As Jonathan mentioned, he was putting into the cost relative to a full home electrification of about 25 homes. Again, and you can see the dollar amounts that we're talking about here.
Okay, and the full home electrification is expensive and really a question of whether that's the best use of those funds. So it's kind of a difficulty. We're discussing this here in Finance Committee, but that's more a deeper dive discussion of the SCAP ad hoc. So then I wanted to ask, there was two references. One on how we compare to neighboring communities or other communities. Was that in one of the tables? I didn't see it.
It is not in any of the tables. We were doing research as part of the creation of the report to understand where we were and in response to various concerns raised by applicants about our rates relative to neighboring jurisdictions.
And
That's where we found most neighboring jurisdictions are applying the state cap to the fees. We did not find evidence to support subsidies or otherwise for it, simply just following the state cap limit and applying that to the fees that
Okay.
are being charged.
And if we simply went to the state caps,
And for clarification and with legal in the room, to be clear to all applicants, we are currently at the state caps per state law. So because we do not have a written finding authorizing us to exceed that it's been approved by council, the state cap is what is in play now.
So the written finding would raise our rates
Exactly.
more above the caps, which our neighboring, or I'm sorry, which our residents are saying are already higher than other jurisdictions.
So they were saying it was higher because the state cap had not yet been applied. The state cap is applied, refunds have been issued to those who were charged the incorrect fee, and the state cap is what is currently charged, which is consistent with other jurisdictions. If we chose to pursue a written finding that exceeded the state cap, we would then be out of sync with neighboring jurisdictions by being higher than them, but we would also be contributing revenue to the general fund.
No, we would be fully recovering our costs associated with these.
So, yeah.
It's not
Correct.
it's not like you're making money to
Yeah,
get it
It's
clearly.
not revenue, it's
It's cost recovery.
It's covering, it's reaching full cost recovery. Thank you for the clarification.
And then maybe just to clarify on the timeline. So what happened was when we adopted the fee study, it was adopted at full cost recovery because that was the most recent study being done. And so when we started getting these complaints, we re-looked at it and compared it to neighboring jurisdictions. And that's when we discovered from August to about November, there were about 80 permits that we should have refunded. And so we've been going through that process and bringing that forward now for discussion.
we really have two issues. We have to deal with the refunds and whether we would use electric subsidies to make up the difference there, or are we only talking about using the electric subsidies going forward?
Only using the subsidies going forward.
Okay. And then I wanted to really understand better on our costs. And do we have any idea what our costs are like compared to other communities or our processes that might suggest costs?
So we have some idea, and I can defer to Chief Building Official Hoyt on some of this, but this is an example that came up with the electrical vehicle charging stations, for example, and how we were able to further
I
streamline that.
understand you cited the example, but I want to understand this more deeply.
Right. And so I'm citing that as the clear example of looking at what other jurisdictions were doing, and they were not sending fire out to inspect level ones at homes. That was a way that they were able to keep costs down, respond faster, and improve cycle time. And so that is something that we have been able to adopt as well. In terms of how our costs per activity stack up to other jurisdictions, I would defer to George on the specifics there. But I think when you talk about, the time, the energy it takes to get through those things, the number one contributor to any of those is staffing and the labor it takes to do it. And we know Palo Alto is an expensive place, and the labor it costs to do that is expensive as well. And so that is one of those elements there. George, I didn't know if you had anything you wanted to add about process and how we relate to others.
George Hoyt, Chief Building Official. I just wanted to add that for these electrification components, we have done many streamlining things that we potentially could, utilizing Solar App Plus where we can, combining our inspections as Stephen had suggested, moving forward, trying to limit the need for urban forestry to get involved if we're doing underground conduits. So hopefully most of these projects like EVSE projects have to do with just inside the garage and the electrical inside the garage and not outside. So those type of things we have been exploring as much as we possibly can. We know that there are some efforts on the horizon through Solar App Plus to look at building it out to accommodate EVSE in the future, but we're probably looking 1.5 years or 2 years before that is actually available.
In this table 1, we've got Solar App Plus and and with the, I guess, ESS, is that the storage?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Energy storage.
And yet, even with that, our 2026 fees before we roll them back or rebate shows it's a lot more expensive than the state cap. So am I understanding that right? That even with something like Solar App Plus, the state cap is below a streamlined process cost?
It's tough. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. Definitely.
And then Steve had mentioned the level 1 chargers, and I didn't know there was. I mean, level 1 is a 110.
Yeah, it's actually level 1, level 2, and so level 2 is what we see more.
Well, but level 1,
It's just a receptacle. 110
I know.
receptacle.
So my question is, why is there a permit for level 1? I didn't know there were permits for level 1. Why would there be a permit to plug in that other than any different from plugging in any other outdoor device?
Yeah, there would only be a permit if they had to add a new receptacle to a new location.
Oh, okay. That's different from requiring permits for level 1. I'm glad I'm off the hook. Okay. That's a valuable clarification. And so the streamlining that we've done, one, I think there's been a lot of streamlining going on in the development center and the permitting. And good work is being done, I think, too much in a vacuum, that the council and the community are not adequately aware of some of the things like you just said. So how can we get an actual summary of the streamlining that has been done and anything else that's on the horizon? As you mentioned, the Solar App Plus for EVs.
I remember the subject coming up, I think, when we were last in front of this team. And we were going to coordinate with Jonathan Late and Jonathan Abenshine to see if we could do some brochures and some mailings and some other type of things. So we can definitely circle back and bring that back up to the top.
Okay. I think that covers my questions. Thanks.
I want to go with a couple questions that are add-ons to what Councilman Burt said. I'm still coming up to speed in a remedial way on the other funds that are not general funds are just funds that essentially don't touch our budget, but they're separate funds that we can draw on to provide some of these services.
So to be clear, so as you know, we have many different pots of funding that the city receives and
grants and all kinds of stuff.
right. And there's many different, well, let's just call the different types colors, right? There's different colors of money and the different colors reflect different restrictions associated with them.
Right.
Obviously, to fund these subsidies, general fund does not have restrictions and is always a viable source to fund a subsidy like this. What staff through Jonathan and Alan have identified that actually other cities don't necessarily have, because they don't all have utilities like we do, is we do have these other funds that could be eligible outside of the general fund to provide relief or subsidies in these areas by way of our gas and electric utility. And so that's what they're talking about, is these alternative funding sources that the council has actually adopted a resolution to use towards SCAP goals.
And so those funds, there could be new ones, there could be old ones that ran out of money, et cetera. So by definition, those funds are capped, which means we need the rebates to be capped, right? So how do we plan for that in terms of, you said about 25 homes? If the demand is 50, is it first come, first serve?
Those are all policy choices that Jonathan, through his work on the SCAP program, is allocating those funding sources. So although it's a web of different options, they do all receive an annual contribution in one way, shape, or form, governed by state or our utilities and our use of them.
When you said they, is that all the funds you mean?
All the different types, right? They talked about LCFS, carbon fuel standard, current cap and trade, and public benefits. So those are three different types of non-rate revenues, but revenues that the city could use towards and does use towards either low income programs or sustainability programs. So it's a policy choice in alignment with the rules of the different options that the council could choose to allocate towards these subsidies instead of the general fund.
Yeah, but if there's a rush on some certain kind of deal here, either we have to change the allocation or we just have to say no if we have an annual allocation. Or if we don't have an annual allocation, then it has to do with when the fund is expires.
Yeah, so I just want to clarify that these are, we receive revenues for each of these sorts of funding sources every year.
Okay.
We do have some accumulated revenues. And the most durable, longest term so far has been public benefits. So there is a longer a funding source that we're not anticipating going away necessarily. So
Okay.
there is a potential long term there. The 25 that I cited was not the number of rebates that we'd be able to provide. It was if you were just providing upfront incentives, which Councilmember Burt noted was something we're trying to move away from, but that's the number of whole homes you could electrify as a way of just getting your head around what the impact on other electrification programs might be in the short term.
Okay, good clarification.
In the long term, it could be more. You could probably do more with those funds with financing programs. But just in our current upfront incentive model, that's the context.
Okay, so qualifications for any of these rebates is strictly what we're seeing here on the table, that they install that and do it adequately. And
that's right. And I think you're right to also note that it is based on those specific assumptions. And if we do start to see acceleration in the number of permits that are being applied for, solar has been relatively stable for a while, and the tax credits are going away. So, I think that's probably a pretty good estimate for solar. With electric vehicles, maybe a little more uncertain. Electric vehicle charging, sorry.
okay. Let's see, George, did you have any questions put on the table?
Yes, I had a few questions really just to fill in some questions I had that weren't fully answered by response to Councilmember Burt. You mentioned, Steve, how most cities are applying the state caps for solar. Where are we relative to other cities in terms of HVAC or electric service and EV charging? Are we similarly multiple times higher or significantly higher?
So we weren't multiple times higher, but we were towards the high end on each of those as we were looking at them. So
Okay.
It wasn't, 2x or anything, but as you look at neighboring jurisdictions, we were higher than others. The other thing that I have not yet covered, but appears in the staff report, is that electrical vehicle charging stations are also subject to current legislation that is working its way through the House. And so as we talk about state caps for solar and energy storage systems, it would behoove us to think about it as potential precedent for electrical vehicle charging stations as well. So should a state cap be applied to electrical vehicle charging stations, would we want to pursue a similar subsidy for it where we pursue a written finding that exceeds the state cap and then do a rebate? It doesn't necessarily need to be addressed today since that legislation is working its way through the state, but it is an item on the table.
Yep. I did have a batch of questions which were largely answered about what other streamlining opportunities could look like. One just that I'm curious about is the Solar App Plus program, which we have fees laid out in 2026 for. So I believe you were saying that this system would be available in a year or two, but we currently have fees for it. So is it available is Solar App Plus available in some capacity now?
Solar App Plus is available for residential photovoltaic and ESS, and the combination of those two systems together.
Okay.
It is not available for ESS standalone, but it is available for PV standalone. In the future that I was speaking of, about 18 months to 2 years away, is the potential for residential EVSE.
Okay, got it. And I guess this report was also a little bit confusing there because the column was FY 2024 permits issued, which had no Solar App Plus, but presumably for the last year, we would expect some adoption of Solar App Plus since it's more standardized, less expensive, right?
That's correct. And we do see quite a bit of Solar App Plus come in for PV and
And
ESS systems together.
yeah, and to that point, the updated number I gave of about the $225,000 annual impact is reflective of solar app permits being in there as well.
Okay. And just so I do understand what was happening on EV chargers. Steve, you mentioned that level 1 chargers could skip fire review, and then our chief building official said that it would be actually level 1 and 2. Just to be clear, it's level 1 and 2 no longer need fire inspections.
That is correct.
Okay.
And that's correctly noted in the tables and was just an inadvertent omission on my part as I referenced them.
Okay. Would there be any concerns if we do different levels of subsidy based on sort of complexity or tiering, like maybe Solar App Plus, which is maybe more standardized and streamlined and easy for us, gets a subsidy, but maybe some other but maybe other line items don't. We'd have the discretion to pick options like that, right?
Ultimately, these are policy decisions to be made by the council. I think there is discretion there in how you apply them. I would counsel that it is also a matter of implementing that policy direction.
Yeah.
And to the extent that we can be, frankly, as straightforward as possible with what it is, and clear direction helps address that, it will make it easier to implement through our systems as well, and easier to track and easier to report back on. To the chair's point, well, how much of this has been subsidized, activity levels throughout the year, and being able to say, this is what we've seen so far. This is how we've used these funds so far in future years, should that subsidy be pursued.
Okay. Maybe a tricky question, because I haven't actually reviewed our sort of cost of service study and analysis here, but are there any other sort of tiers or differentiation between these different permits where under some Pareto principle where 20% of the permits are 80% of the costs, could we apply state caps to most of the say single family solar systems, but then find some other distinction or some other tier or some other rate design? Is that something that we've considered? Is that something that is prohibitively complex or time consuming for this exercise? If we'd want to give subsidies, or I'd want to give subsidies to as many people as possible, but there are some outlier cases where a seemingly simple permit actually costs us a really disproportionate amount to review, then maybe we don't want to fully subsidize those edge cases. Maybe we want to subsidize as many people as possible, but not like the one special complex case where it's complex because of something to do with the applicant.
So Councilmember and Sarah, correct me if I'm wrong, these fees that are in front of you are the flat rate fees. And so these are for exactly what you just described, the standard application processing. To the extent that there are applications that go beyond the standard, the planning team or the development center has hourly rates, as well as additional inspection fees that they would assess to scale with the complexity of what someone is providing. So I think that's the piece to remember is that what you really are looking at are those baseline, routine under each of these types of applications. Now, to your point, if you want to change your subsidy level, one way could be, instead of tiering that, simply saying for any solar app subsidies, we want to subsidize them $200, which would essentially make it fully subsidized. And for any single family, we would like to subsidize them $500, which would only be a piece of it.
Okay.
So you might consider it in that way. But beyond what I just explained in terms of that adjustment, I think you're getting into something that's not worth the administrative cost to implement.
Okay.
To splice what are about 200 applications a year.
Okay. So if I have some extraordinarily special glass roof that would require an order of magnitude more cost and effort. I am not being subsidized by people with normal roofs. I will pay extra per hour, and people with normal roofs will just pay this fee, and I with a special glass roof will pay some fee that's not listed here.
So what you're looking at here, if you look at the FY26 fees, how that fee is developed, it's time times material. And in our case, material is staff time. So there's a baseline assumption of how many hours of plan check, fire plan reviewers, or building inspection time. If we go beyond the normal, what we do is the staff will add an hourly rate for complex projects so that we are able to achieve full cost recovery.
Okay, got it. Just yeah, wanted to sort of triple check that with a very explicit example, and that's helpful to understand. Yeah, overall, I'm certainly comfortable with moving to state caps. I think for solar and energy storage systems.
We're just at questions right now, and then we go to the public.
Okay. Well, those are my questions.
Okay, great. Is there any public comment?
There is. Our first request to speak is Darren. Darren, you should now be able to unmute yourself.
Go fuck yourself.
That concludes public comment.
Okay, now we can come back. Probably best to talk of these in order. Is that the best way for us to process like the
Sure, I realized a couple follow-up questions.
Sure.
Ask them before we get into kind of the action.
Sure, go ahead.
Okay, so first I want to make sure I'm understanding the tables correctly. So table 1, under the fee title, it's got KW ranges in the first several. So so it's not an amp service. What is being described there?
What are you reading now?
Under table 1, the fee title.
Those are the kilowatts of the size of the system that we'll be producing. So if it's photovoltaic or ESS, that's the amount of kilowatts that that system would be, a range of kilowatts that that system would be producing.
Okay, I got it. Okay. And then on the issue of costs, I was seeing the level 2 charger cost is $1,327. If I think I saw that correctly.
You did.
So what goes into that example?
Well, it's our base fee for our administrative cost is one aspect of it. The other is, I think there is a 30-minute building inspection time. In this example, there's probably also a 30-minute fire inspection time, which I said that we had sharpened our pencil and we had reduced that. There is also some urban forestry time in there that I think we can cut down if it's not if it's only interior work and there's no exterior work or no trees nearby. That's what I recall from looking at the table last time I looked at it.
And the base fee is what?
I don't recall the exact base fee. I think it's 305. 305, yeah. So what the base fee is, what it's charging for and accounting for is the baseline of us processing a permit. So think about the project coordinator or the overhead of running the development center. And so when you look at what's developed in the time, there's that baseline of the project coordinator needs to take time to take in the application, review it, route it. That's what it's accounting for.
Yeah. So $300 to do what, really, when we're talking about that? How complicated is a level 2 charger permit application that requires $300 just for that base review and put it through the system? That I'm just trying to understand our efficiencies in that regard.
Yeah, I will say that, you know, that's a base fee that was established for all standalone permits through the cost effectiveness study. In this particular situation, there is a couple different applications. Getting the proper permit application from the applicant can be a little bit of a back and forth process. There's a utility application that needs to be filled out and that needs to be processed. Some of these cases, we're looking for a single line diagram or some specific information regarding the equipment that they're installing. And that can be a little bit of a time getting that information into the system and then routing it to review and collecting the fees and issuing the permit.
And you mentioned a utility review or application?
It's a utility application that we complete. We route it to utilities so that they understand where these chargers are placed.
So that's a notification. It's not them reviewing it and scrutinizing or making a determination. It's just
They do
know where
review certain aspects of it, maybe not level 2. I think when we get it into something much higher, they scrutinize it.
Yeah. So, I mean, we've had some real significant discussions on our whole grid mod was being largely triggered by the number of level 2 and level 3 chargers. And we should say that in level 2, that's just the voltage. Level 2 can be a low amp level 2, a 20 amp, up to a 60 amp level 2. And a 20 amp level 2 or a 30 amp level 2 is not going to trigger anything that I'm aware of in transformer demand of any significance. But you start getting a 60 amp, 50, 60 amp level 2s, and that I thought was what was really causing the scrutiny. Does that transformer have capacity when you've got 5 neighbors who did the same thing or whatever? And Alan, you look like you might have some insights there.
Yeah, so there's a couple technologies that we leverage, and yes, we do get in and coordinate with the building and planning departments in terms of those. The single level 2 chargers, we're not as concerned. It's part of our more constant review, and we have larger systems, multiple chargers where they're increasing typically, to like a 400 amp panel. Something larger than that, then we talk to those customers as well, so they understand the cost associated that's going to be borne by them, and sometimes they look at managed charging to what you may have been about to allude to. So we do have that coordination as well, and then as part of that, we want to know where all our photovoltaic systems are, all the batteries, where the chargers are at, so we can take a look at the system in terms of do we need to upgrade transformers as part of serving the community, and make sure that we can, as people want to electrify, we can stay ahead of that curve. And then if we have to do replacements, we do a replacement once. We don't go back again, so we can look at the planning for that area of the community that is electrifying. So we've done that very successfully in the last year, working with planning and working with community development, because there was a big push this year to take advantage of all the tax credits. In 2025. So that was kind of our baseline of how much we can do, and we're able to keep pace with the community.
One of the things that was referenced was that we want to know where these chargers are. But as I recall from previous discussions, most folks were not getting permits for their EV chargers. And that was a big problem, and part of why we were seeing transformer demands that didn't make sense and all that. So one of the issues that we're going to need to grapple with is the higher the feed structure, the greater chance that they're going to avoid getting a permit. Yeah. Same time, one of the things that I brought up previously is if we're seeing such a high level of avoidance of permits on EV chargers, one, what's our communication to the community that a permit is required? And what's our penalty system for non-compliance? The third thing would be we could set a high penalty system, but how do we enforce that? But the notion that we're going to have a fee structure that may or may not exacerbate noncompliance, that we got an issue with noncompliance. We just said that we want to know where these are. So can you speak to grappling with that issue? We've got things, how can we reduce the cost? How can we reduce the fee, whether because of cost or subsidy or otherwise? And how do we incentivize right activities and disincentivize wrong ones?
I'll just start off by saying I think we're doing many of the things that we possibly can, as in streamlining the permit issuance in these automatic permit issuance situations like Solar App Plus, and utilizing that. A lot of our instant permitting processes that we have put in place recently for heat pump space heating conditions and those sort of things, our heat pump water heater instant permit processes. Streamlining that, making that easier for applicants is definitely part of that. Reducing the amount of trips that we have to go out, or the amount of people that we involved in a particular inspection, which we have been working very hard streamlining that and getting that thing done. So I think these are the main key points. At the end of the day, applying the state caps is never going to recuperate the type of cost that needs to be utilized at processing these. We have moved a lot of the enforcement mechanism from office of doing plan check into the field through these instant permits, and I think it's working well. And I think we just need to campaign more about the need to get a permit and the ease of the process to do it where we have these platforms available.
And in table 2 and 3, we don't have the state cap listed. Is that part of?
Right. So that's the distinction between the different tables. So table 1 lists the fees that the state cap applies to. Table 2 is additional electrification activities that would be a discretionary subsidy at the choice of the city council in furtherance of electrification as a policy goal.
There's no state cap on those?
Correct. There is no current state cap on those.
Okay.
Similarly, for electrical vehicle charging stations, there is currently no state cap, although there is current legislation working its way through.
And make sure I got the right one. Under table 3, it's described as refined review process fee. What does that mean exactly?
I'll let Chief Building Official Hoyt weigh in more here, but this is really that shift from what was included in the cost of service study that we did last April, where for level 1 and level 2 charger, there was building inspection time, there was fire inspection time, there was urban forestry inspection time, and there was all those additional layers being applied to it. When going back through and instead seeing how can we streamline this as much as practicable and possible to get this done as quickly as possible, as you were alluding to, lowering the cost and thereby lowering the fee. That's what this is proposing.
Oh,
so this, for electrical vehicle charging, it would not be a subsidy. It really does reflect a lowering of costs associated with these. It would not be treated the same as table 1 and table 2, where we would be drawing on those potential buckets to subsidize it. This would be council essentially telling us to pursue this refined process, and we would return as part of the FY27 muni fee process for these fees.
okay. And that title was stumping me. And maybe what it really means is reduce cost, not reduce price. Well, it's reduced price because of reduced cost.
Yes.
And maybe we just ought to call it that, or something to that effect. Because I was going, what am I dumb on getting this here?
To the council member's point about the importance of branding, happy to incorporate that into further discussion.
I would say that in terms of appreciating what we're doing, refined review sounds like bureaucratic talk. Reduced cost is something that's good and people understand. So, okay. Yeah.
So that means that
You're fine, Mike?
the suggested fees, just to confirm what he just said, the suggested fees for single family 1 and 2 is 307.
Yeah, I'll again defer to Chief Building Official Hoyt, but that would be the incredibly reduced cost available through a
I
reduced.
don't know if I'd call it incredibly. When we look at it, this is the sort of cost that we're going to have, because that's really all we ought to be doing.
And we're saying
And
that,
we're getting to that point. That's a real good thing. But the costs that we had above that, we're determining weren't necessary.
yeah, that's what I was just
So
gonna
I
say.
don't know that that's incredible to come down from doing some things that wasn't necessary to just the very minimum that's necessary.
Well, you took out process, which is labor, which reduced your cost. That's what I'm hearing in terms of fire inspections and multiple other inspections. So
Yes, that's correct.
right.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, I think that when we get to that, I have another suggestion for that. But the whole thing about we're on EVs right now. We need to have a low cost, or they're going to not even go to the next step. And probably 300 is tolerable. Okay, but beyond that, it's also how much time is this going to take? What's the elapsed time? Do I have to go through 3 processes, 4 processes because I got my car? I want to put it in, or I'm going to buy it tomorrow, or whatever. And the third one, frankly, is just the city's reputation, because that is the worst thing that keeps people from buying electrical vehicles. Is, oh man, don't buy one in Palo Alto, because you got to go through all this and it costs. And so this kind of thing is perfect because it addresses all 3 of those variables to just get down to a small cost. But then we have to find a way to make sure that from the time that the thing is passed till the time that it's official, that's really compressed time.
Yeah, and we set all these projects as a priority, and many of them are over the counter, which is like 1 to 2 days in our process. So
yeah,
we are processing these as quickly as we possibly can.
Well,
if not instantly on some of these categories that we're talking about today.
Let me bring up this suggestion or idea I had to see if it holds water at all. It's in this regard as well. What if you had 10 approved contractors that if they go out and they do it based on they've already applied, they're qualified, they show you 2 jobs they've done, whatever the qualifications are, then in the case of single family, the homeowner calls the electrician, the electrician's there, the electrician can even get the permit so that's out of the hands. And then there's no inspections except there's audits. So it doesn't mean that 100% of them have to be inspected, but you figure out what the percentage is, and you understand where I'm going with that. And I'm not saying that's a full-blown proposal, but is there a way that we can put it in the contractor's hands with qualified contractors and take out more trips from your department and your inspectors?
Honestly, it sounds like a really great idea. The reality is it's not. Many of these contractors that do this work sub this out to other individuals that are doing the work. And quite honestly, that is the role of our department, is to make sure that the work is compliant. And I know there's a lot of interest around looking at these type of systems and letting contractors self-certify their work and come in with audits. From an operational standpoint, it's a lot of work on our end to just figure out how many of these have to be audited a month, or about going out there and doing that. And how do we gain access to go back and audit these after they've already been installed, and gaining that access, as well as making them correct the work. Or then if they don't pass their audit, do we not allow them to work anymore? And we don't really want to get in the predicament to say, you should be working with this vendor versus this vendor. We would like to have an overall process that's easy, that any vendor can come in and work with us on.
Yeah, those are good objections. I think at least for the initial heat pump hot water heaters we put in, we did do that, because I know when I put mine in, I was one of the guinea pigs.
We worked with a vendor through our utility department, and we worked very collaboratively with that contractor in inspecting those units. And they understood what we needed. There was a lot of tight communication within that.
But they came out and did the inspection.
They did not do the inspection. We did the inspection.
And I will note.
That's a longer conversation than with my contractor.
Happy to have that conversation offline.
You may need to have that conversation. Okay, sorry, were you done?
No, but
Okay.
George can go.
Yeah, George.
Maybe one more question for me. I want to understand how the underlying costs are charged. So, particularly, I noticed that the 2025 rates charges were much more in line with the caps and much less than 2026. And I know the value of the theoretical subsidy that we could or are already giving. But it'd be useful to have some color, like, are we so short-staffed that we send out drawing review to a contractor service that charges us $100 per thing? If we do, in cases where we do need fire department review, like level 3 chargers, are we paying fire department overtime? Because there are these discontinuities where at some point we can absorb some theoretical subsidies without actually incurring more costs, but at some point there are very sort of clear direct general fund implications. So where are we in that spectrum? Can you give some color on that? Go ahead.
Just to provide some context to the FY 2025 fees. So development services last underwent a fee study, I want to say in 2016 or 2017. And since then, that rate has been grown basically with our general rate of increase. And it's not reflective, which is why best practice is every 5 to 8 years. We do these cost of services study to realign our costs with how operations change. Since the last fee study was done, there was also a department merger, and there were a lot of changes. And so this new cost is reflective of the updated work it takes to deliver that particular permit. And so that's why you see a significant jump, because it's
right.
The 2025 figures are misaligned in the particular permit of where costs are.
Right. So we're actually 2025 fees, basically the 2016 fees without inflation. With some inflation.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, rooftop solar panels were pretty popular and were somewhat mainstream of technology in 2016, for example. But then the costs basically a bit less than 3x. And I understand that building codes and things like that become more complicated over time. Okay. Anyway, sorry. I'd appreciate some color on the point about when costs actually get charged, when we actually, incur overtime, or what kind of costs we can absorb.
Yeah, currently all these projects that we're talking about in the scope of work, we do these in-house. We do not send any of these out for outside plan review or inspections. And that is for the building aspect of it. I can't speak to fire department, but I believe that they do the majority of theirs in-house as well. Maybe a very large, complicated commercial system, we might send that out, but the majority of these that we are speaking about today, we do in-house. And currently we are not authorizing any overtime within our department.
Got it. So even if we do move ahead with subsidies or otherwise reduce costs, okay, that's helpful context. We will potentially have to do more work as people apply for more permits, but we're not necessarily expecting like a linear cost increase as maybe people apply for more permits. We still have some slack with our current in-house staff.
We'll make it work depending on what the workload comes in as, but we don't expect any huge bump.
Okay, that's helpful to understand the worst case as far as the costs of these subsidies go.
Okay. Do you have any more that can we go? Yeah, more, or should we go to the, like?
No, I have some else.
This is on everything, not just the number one of
I don't know. What's your number one?
well, it follow state cap limits for photovoltaic and energy storage, or pursue written finding. That's the first thing they want us to.
We're kind of,
no.
grouped by the tables. so.
Before we get to those specifics, so there was a question about, well, could we audit a certain percentage? But one thing that's been a movement in inspections is allowing photographed completed conditions remotely. Is that something that is potentially applicable here? And is that more applicable to a low amp level 2 than a high amp level 2 or a level 3?
It is something that we could consider. I don't think it's going to save cost and time. And I'll tell you why, because it still takes the time for the inspector to sit down and look at those photos, direct somebody to go to look at a situation. And when you're just looking at certain components of a system, which is what happens through these remote inspections, point your camera here, point your camera there, you're not seeing the overall concept of the whole situation. And so it's much more effective to place your eyes in the environment and see what is going on.
But
And I just don't see the
things?
costs. I just don't see the time savings.
Well, if I'm hearing you right, we got two different things. One's a quality value of being on site. The other is an efficiency, and I don't follow that it takes the same amount of time to carefully look at photos as to go out and do a site inspection. That doesn't make any sense. You can make the quality argument that says, but I don't feel comfortable with the safety and ramifications of the photo inspection, but not that it's the same efficiency in terms.
I'm not saying it's the same if I'm saying I don't feel comfortable from the life safety aspect of it.
That's what I suspected you meant. But the other thing is, if we did feel comfortable, it would be a cost saving. But you're having a discomfort from life safety, and that goes back to my other question. I get if you're going to put a level 3, 440, but if somebody's putting in a 20 amp level 2, is that the same situation? You have the same discomfort?
I mean, you're talking about electrical. If it's wired backwards, right? You get reverse polarity. There's different situations that you would need to test. It's less, but they're all electrical components. They're things that need to be.
But bear in mind, what is it? We thought that we were only having less than half of these being permitted. So by requiring the on-site inspection and the costs that go with that, are we further exacerbating a situation where you're not getting any inspection? So the choices might be, and not necessarily, but it might be on-site inspection, photo inspection, no inspection. No inspection because people didn't go for the permit.
Mm.
So when you compare a perfect world of saying, I really want to do an on-site inspection for a 20 amp 220, because it just, there's a possibility something could have been wrong there. But what about the trade-off that might exist between, oh no, in that case, they're going to blow you off and you're not going to do any inspection and not going to have any permit. So is that when we think about safety, we need to look at a couple comparisons?
Sure. I rather have some eyes or some visibility than no visibility.
Yep.
And as we go through some of the work that we're doing on the DC process improvement, it is something we can explore.
Yeah, and I don't know whether the direction that's been going on photographs that are just, transmitted on site by iPhone or even a video, and you got an inspector, it says, okay, I'm scheduling the inspection, but I just don't have to have the expense of going out to the job site. The contractor's there with his phone, the inspector's in the office and says, nope, I can't see that well enough. I want to see something else. But that's really quick compared to how long does an inspection really take for an EV? Once the inspector gets there, how much time are they really spending to look at the adequacy of particularly a low amp level 2. That's got to be pretty simple inspection. So going there and back sounds like the bigger expense.
Yeah, I mean, we're in a route. We're going from place to place to place during the day. So it's if we're doing remote inspections like that, a staff member staying behind, there has to be a set schedule to keep him busy to do that periodically.
Or
The one off or two that we do, it may not be worthwhile to, oh, I have to go back to the office, get on my computer, log on, conduct the inspection, result the inspection, log off.
Okay.
What's in the 307 estimate now for, is it one trip to inspect for you and none for fire?
It is one trip.
And if you find something wrong and have to go back because you say, this is wired totally wrong, is it an extra fee then? Or we're not at that stage?
We don't quite go to that stage. If we have to go back a third time, then we charge additional fee.
Okay. My neighbor was doing a video inspection that I witnessed with a tree arborist because the redwood tree was pressing up against the foundation. And that's a different story because I'm not looking at the tree. I wasn't looking at the tree roots and the wiring and so on. And that person was remote and she did the whole inspection, said, put it here, put it here, put it here, and said, I think you're fine. So she made the decision in that regard. And the homeowner who was selling the house thought he was going to probably have to take it down. So it was a nice day for him. So it can be done, but that's an example of something that's not quite as complex.
Another question, I had in the back of my head that there is a state law or regulation that limits what we can charge on level 2 chargers, and I couldn't remember whether it was at a certain amperage. Is that correct?
No, it's done.
Not as of yet. There's legislation currently underway to apply a state cap to that.
Okay, I just thought that there had been
No.
Oh, maybe it was that they had to be over the counter. Is that it? Nothing? No?
Not for EVSE.
Okay. I'll just say that one of the other things we had no listed level 3 chargers. But one of the things we've talked about is even within level 2s, did we want to incentivize folks to not upscale their chargers beyond their needs? What we found was that EV sellers for years were saying, oh yeah, you get a 60 amp level 2 and you can charge your Tesla in 3 hours and you have no problems. But you're going home, who needs to fully charge their Tesla in 3 hours? And so we had throughout the community oversized chargers that were triggering panel upgrades and triggering transformer upgrades. And so we said, gee, we want to really educate people that they don't need to go through that expense, but we also want to build into our incentive programs and our fees the right incentive. So if we're looking, in this case, we're not looking at a subsidy, but I just want to make sure that we're being conscious of differentiating, even we're putting level 2 all in one bucket. And what we want to do is encourage people to have 20 or 30 amp level 2s if they can live with that and not go to 50, 60. It doesn't look like we have that ability because we're not subsidizing. Is that correct? Is there any way in this, what we're looking at here, where we could incentivize the right conduct?
You charge more for the big ones.
Well, that's what I'm asking.
Yeah,
Yeah,
you
but
go the other
it's
direction.
cost-based.
You could not subsidize or not apply the state cap fee to the larger.
Well,
There's a state.
but I think we're
cap
on
All right,
EVCF
that-
now,
that's
George.
EVS.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
on EVs.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Right. Don't have the
Yeah.
subsidy.
So
And-
we just couldn't have this. We could reduce the subsidy.
There-
Well, do we
not-
have a
or
subsidy?
not
We don't have a subsidy at all, do we?
Right. So this is for the electrical vehicle charging station.
Yeah.
What we're proposing is the reduced cost. I want to make sure I get the
Yeah,
branding.
so
right.
we did a good thing. We got the cost down.
Right.
Mhm.
And so because we have that cost down, regardless of whether it's a level 1, level 2, and regardless of what amperage it is, a level 2, if it's a 20 amp, 30 amp, 60 amp, it's the same cost.
Well, is it?
And so this is, I think, where there's room to further explore with George and say,
Yeah.
well, when we streamlined this, when we reduced the cost, what was that based on?
Yeah,
And if we push that more, does it take more cost to do one of those higher amperages?
That's my question.
And so I
Okay.
think that is something that we
Is the
can,
inspection longer? for
right, is the
example?
inspection longer? Is there greater work necessary on the back end to make sure everything's lined up? Is there greater coordination necessary with utilities, to your point about grid utilization, et cetera? So I think that's something we can take back if that's something to be explored.
That'd be great. Similarly with, when we are talking about, I think it's in table 2 on the service, the new electric service, we've got the 400 amp and above and less than 400. And that does have a subsidy, right? In that. And have we thought about whether, given that we've seen a lot of contractors say, oh, you're electrifying, just go 400 amps. And Alan has said to me, he has personal experience that nothing like that's needed. And so have we looked at or thought about whether we want to maybe subsidize a 200 amp panel, but not a 400, for instance?
So let me circle back to the grid modernization project that the utilities is going through right now. So we've given a presentation to the UAC and I believe the SCAP committee in terms of what we're anticipating in terms of the loads and what we're building into the process. So as part of that, we were recognizing that electrification for EV charging and for residents was a built-in requirement and goal for the city. So that was incorporated as part of our build, our standard build
Yeah.
for grid mod.
I just want to make sure I'm understanding this right and everybody else is what you just said there. So previously, without grid mod, we had a bunch of problems. With grid mod, we built in capacity and it doesn't exist so much. The problems aren't so much now, right?
Yeah, so we're building that capacity as into not only the power that we're bringing into the city, but also our receiving stations. We get power from PG&E, our substations, our subtransmission, all the way down to the transformers to the customers. So we're building that in. Now, that said, if there are customers that build larger homes that are building stuff beyond that, then they should be responsible for those costs. And you see that largely in larger homes or commercial buildings where they would pay for the transformers, they would pay for that additional cost so that we have equity to our customers. So there's a baseline electrification, again, like an EV charger. If they go to a heat pump water heater and they electrify their homes, and for the extent that there are higher and more costs and folks want to do more, then that's a cost that they should be bearing and should not be peanut buttered to the rest of the customers.
And to the committee member's question, council member's question, it's a policy decision. If you chose to subsidize amperages lower than 400 and further into the city's electrification and sustainability goals as a policy decision, we can apply that. And then we would not apply the subsidy to people who are installing 400 amps or greater. I will note the FY24 activity level for new service of 400 amps or greater, as noted in the table, is 1. Through March of this year, there were 10. So it is a different activity level that we're seeing. So just wanted to flag that.
Okay.
Thank you. That's good for me.
Okay. So let's go back to the requests, which is on slide 4. So the first one is either follow state caps or pursue written finding that will allow the city to exceed the cap. And to recap that, if we do the finding, we do more cost recovery, but then it does go higher than the normal, than the adjoining communities.
Correct. And that would then prompt the question of, do you want to subsidize it? And if you want to subsidize it from those utility funds that we identified earlier, and then, or from the general fund, and do you want to subsidize it entirely to get back down to the state cap level and be in alignment with neighboring jurisdictions, or do you want to go somewhere in between?
Well, I don't think anybody wants to do it in the general fund. So I think maybe the three of us could take that off the table. And I'd be inclined to go with the findings, because that's what, we did the cost study and put the funding out there, and that's what we can do. And I'm sort of a little bit less concerned about this one than I am about, the gas utility or something, because the people already live here. I don't know if they're going to move because of this one. So, but the question of whether we should do a subsidy. Have to come out with one of these.
Well,
funds.
and
Yeah, go ahead, George.
yeah, go ahead, George.
Generally, I think I am comfortable with the subsidy here from the utility funds. I think we really want to find downward pressure on permit costs. I think potentially if we're reluctant to do a full subsidy, maybe we can focus our subsidies on the set of streamlined solar app installations potentially. I think the intent of state law is, I mean, it's financially burdensome, but it's generally reasonable. And I realize it's not exactly about being competitive with our neighboring cities, but we also want to show that I mean, we've invested a lot in the electrification incentives, and I think this is a case to continue to show how committed we are to that, especially when all of our neighbors are doing this too.
So does staff or anyone else have a suggestion of how much subsidy if we went with, we have the documentation, move it out of the general fund and do a subsidy, or do you need to think about that, or does it have to go to UAC, or what are the options here?
No, ultimately, this is a recommendation from the Finance Committee to the full council on how to set these. What I think I'm hearing from the committee members as you're thinking this through is we would adopt the findings to
Right.
charge the full fees, and simultaneous to that, or rather in parallel, work with our sustainability team to establish rebate programs.
That's right.
Now the question becomes, what would we want those rebates to be set at? As I said earlier, I think the easiest for staff would be flat dollar values. So because it's just administratively a lot easier to process as opposed to calculate. So something like, if you're doing a solar app, if you wanted to make it 100% cost recovery, give them a $200 rebate. Or if you want to further incentivize it, give them a $250 rebate. So that they actually are receiving greater than the permit fee versus your
Right,
single
but
family.
I'm asking if staff shouldn't go back and do that and come those dollars to us, so the $200 or whatever. Are you asking us to come up with more or less with a table today?
I think what staff is asking is what you would recommend the subsidy levels be.
As a percentage?
It could be a percentage, it could be flat. It's ultimately up to the committee's discretion. And that's one of the things I will say is one of the reasons why this is at finance is from a financial perspective, we are keeping all of this SCAP stuff with the finance committee on the numbers side of things, whereas on the policy side of things, the sustainability climate committee is doing it. So that's why it is.
And luckily we have a 2-member overlap between these two committees. So,
there is no overlap. I don't know what you're
That's right.
talking about. We have a firewall, but we do have situational awareness. Let's
two
call it.
people who are experienced in that regard.
Perfect.
I think, so if I just may, in terms of like flat dollar amount, I think policy direction can be given of you want to subsidize to the extent of state cap. And that would mean that if, someone would pay the full price for it. So for that 10 kilowatt or less single family system, they would pay the full $1,481 for it. But if you all said you wanted to fully subsidize that to be consistent with the state cap, they would receive a rebate of $1,031. We can take care of all of that stuff on our end. We're just looking for direction of, do you want to fully subsidize? Do you want to partially subsidize? And that's really where you get into. Or to
That's fair. Good.
Councilmember Liu's question, do you want to go even further for the things that are downward pressure on the permit fees, like solar app, and go, 110% or something?
I did want to ask on the cost on that. As we look at this table 1, the number of permits issued, it's all about the single family PV is the practical impact financially. And we've got the solar app plus. So the 1481 or the 1868 in cost, I understand there's more to inspecting a solar system than an EV charger, but can you tell me what's driving that high of cost, which is driving the subsidy we got to provide, if the permitting is all online and quick? Is it just the rest of it all the inspection, and we got $1,000 or more in inspection?
Well, there's two categories here. One is the single family PV systems, and then there's the solar app PV system. So for the single family PV systems, they do submit a plan. We do review that plan. By our plan review,
I'm sorry,
that's distinct difference.
That's if they choose not to use the solar app.
They choose not to use the solar app.
Okay, sorry about that. Thanks.
Do we do other things that we have considered streamlining or found any real differences with neighboring cities? Like, do we ever send this to the arborist? Do we really need fire inspections depending on certain roof types? Like, have there been any conversations to that effect? Assuming that we do have fire or we do have arborists sometimes involved. So that was just a hypothetical made-up example of for color.
I appreciate that, George. And I will say that, yes, we have drilled down on this to the detailed aspects of it, and we have aligned with what other jurisdictions are looking at in these situations. And we've created a streamlined checklist for our staff to review them, as well as inspection staff to take into consideration when they're inspecting these categories. And we've been improving that over the years, but primarily it started a couple years ago, or 2 to 3 years ago. Time flies, but it's been a while.
Now I realize I got another question since you clarified that. But we're not showing any permits issued for Solar App Plus.
So this is one of the fun nuances of the table, and I apologize that it was not more clearly noted in it. So we did not have Solar App Plus in 2024. As a result, there were no permits issued in 2024. To date, through March of 2026.
Well, what about FY 2025?
Right. And so when this report was first being compiled, we did not yet have the 2025 data either. Obviously, time has gone by since then. And so we looked to see what we've got through March of 2026, reflecting, current activity levels.
That's just for FY 26?
Correct. And there were 45 that were Solar App Plus PV and ESS, and there were an additional 46 that were Solar App plus EVV.
And how many are still not using the Solar App?
And compared to the ones who are not, there were 34 that were residential single family. And it looks like there were 18 that were of greater than 10 kilowatts.
Do we have any idea? So I'm kind of inclined to incentivize customers who already have a lower cost, but are doing the right approach that's more efficient. Why are people not using Solar App Plus?
There are some parameters. You have to be eligible to use Solar App Plus. So there are some design parameters associated with it. So one of them would be you can't do Solar App Plus just to add energy storage system to an existing system. You can't use Solar App Plus to add on to a current system. The service has to be the service needs to contain, let's see here, there's 38.4 kilowatts. So if the PV system's under 38.4 kilowatts, it qualifies. If it has an ESS system up to 38.4, it qualifies. There are some aspects that normally don't, but we try our best through the permitting system. If it is eligible for solar app, we push the applicant to the solar app process.
So you're pretty sure that the ones who are choosing or not using solar app that's because they're ineligible?
I'm pretty confident in that, yes.
Okay, well, then that changes my thinking a little bit on whether we want to penalize them for not using it. I thought that was just discretionary.
Okay, so back to this item that we're on. What percentage of subsidy do we want? I think I heard more than 100 from George, and I think I'm at 100, and I don't know where you are, Pat.
What exactly do you mean by 100 or more than 100? Sorry.
Percent.
Oh,
So fully aligning the
Yes,
subsidy with
yes.
state cap.
I think fully aligning to state cap, at least for Solar App Plus and multifamily, makes sense, given that those are areas where we are more efficient and where there is both more need, more climate impact, and less potential means. I guess the multifamily subsidy would be more symbolic than anything else, given the actual volumes.
And the fee's not that high.
But we still have the question then of single family, the big volume of single family that is not eligible for solar app.
Wait, did I mishear the numbers, or are most single family now using Solar App Plus?
Yeah, so there were 46 that were using solar app plus PV, and then there were an additional 45 that were doing solar app plus PV and ESS. That's a total of about 90 across the two solar app options. For the non-solar app options, there were 18 and 34 my math is right, is about 52. So 52 that were not eligible for solar app versus 90 that were.
Oh, good number. So that's the question. Do we want to basically give a much bigger dollar subsidy to those who are ineligible for solar app, but not necessarily through a fault of their own? So with those numbers, if we got 50 of them at about 1,000, call it 1,000 subsidy, although it's higher for the bigger ones. So it's a $50,000 subsidy or thereabouts. Yeah. So I would be good with one to do it the flat dollar amount that approximates the full subsidy. Is that what you prefer, Kylie? I mean, that you want a flat amount, and that we just simply say whatever's a good round number in the flat amount for each of those categories.
And by that, you're saying multifamily, single family, solar app.
Yeah.
Is that what I'm hearing you say?
Yeah.
So
So if you want to round it,
for sure.
that's good enough with me if it makes it easier for you. And
Mhm.
in some ways, I think the perception from the customer is if you get a round number, they get it. You know, why is it $932?
Yeah.
You know, and yeah, okay.
Exactly.
Can we get that into a motion, that language?
Yeah, it would be to provide subsidy for all the categories, do so from utility funds at an amount that is close to the difference between our costs and the proposed state cap, a round number close to that. Makes
That's
sense.
perfect. And I think the
And
only
just-
addition to the clerk would be that the committee is also saying that the committee recommends council adopt the findings to implement the
Yeah.
full fees.
Yeah,
Well said.
it has to be
And-
there.
Okay.
Perfect.
And
George,
know-
you second?
I have just one clarification that the clerk is drafting it. Just noting that it would be non-rate revenues from utilities.
Correct.
Yeah, good. George is seconding?
And sorry, just want to triple check. So would we be at the state cap levels then?
From the
Post subsidy?
From the perspective of the
perspective
applicant,
yes,
they would
okay,
pay the
yes.
full fee, then they would
Yes.
be rebated and
Quantum,
it would be
yes, okay.
very, very close to the
Yes.
state cap, if not at state cap.
Yes, then I second yes.
Maker, could you look at the text on screen? Make sure she spells your name right too, George.
Yeah.
Okay, please call the vote.
One moment, I found a typo.
Oh, no.
Councilmember Burt,
Yes.
Councilmember Liu,
Yes.
Chair Lowing,
Yes,
motion carries.
thank you. Now, the second one is discretionary subsidy for electric service and HVAC permits. If subsidized, what's the funding source?
We're talking about those same special revenues and this would go above and beyond the program impacts that I talked about with respect to solar.
It would do what?
So you're talking about another 40,000 or so. So it'd probably increase the program impacts by about 2/3 compared to what the program impacts were for just the solar.
Program impacts means
The SCAP program impacts, you'd have to reduce the money going to SCAP programs by about 2/3 more if you were to add this on.
So John had given this 25 home,
right.
whole home, and that's not the cost of the whole home, that's the cost of the subsidies we would provide. And so similarly, that's what it would be here.
And as noted in the PowerPoint, the final column of table 2 shows the annual estimate based on 24 activity levels. Based on current year activity levels, this would be a lower cost to subsidize at about 70,000 or so.
And you have the current or more current activity level.
Yes. And so for electric service of 400 amps or greater, there were 10. Less than 400 amps, there were 119. And again, this is through end of March. So we're
This year, so it's.
so you would grow by about a quarter.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think those are the biggest ones. And then HVAC, across all of the different ones, we've seen much lower numbers of approximately 40.
But the bottom row?
Right. And so the 40 number I gave is kind of across all the closest approximation would be 25 for HVAC system single family so far this year.
25 for single family, 15 for, oh, sorry.
And so I think part of what we're seeing here is that there are other things in the splits. And so we can double check all those numbers as we get through this.
Something sounds really surprising there that it would drop by 9. Well, I'm just, yeah, the bottom one that went from 219 down to 20 or so. That does make sense. Okay, well, maybe while they're checking that, George can.
Oh, I was just confirming explicitly when he said 25 for single family, that would mean 15 HVAC installations were for multifamily.
Right. Yeah. So the math I initially gave, correct.
Okay.
But I'll be double checking all
Yeah,
the things.
yes. And is there a reason why we contemplated a 54% subsidy for HVAC for single family, but around 25 to 34% for multifamily? Any particular rationale or
Yes, so this is the asterisk note. That's probably a little difficult to see if you're looking anywhere other than table 2. And I think this is part of the reason why these numbers are so much lower, because the city council did adopt a fee for residential gas, water, and space heating equipment standalone as its own fee in September of 2025. And so that fee was already set at that level of approximately $328. And that's what I'm going to check for the council member's question, because I believe there's been a significant uptick in that standalone permit versus what we call the HVAC permit. And so it's a nuance of how things are titled, and I'll close that loop momentarily.
Yeah, the $300 and something is kind of a good place to be compared to these higher numbers.
You know, at one high level, as John has made this comparison of how many whole homes we could subsidize versus what we'd get here. I think one of the things we want to ask ourselves, if we've got these utility revenues for this kind of purpose from the cap and invest and otherwise, what's the best use of them? And in this case, we're saying, well, we'd apply it toward reducing fees to do these activities that we think correlate to electrification, right? We're not seeing many people that are pursuing they could get a higher amp service and still not electrify, but that's kind of unlikely, right?
I mean, it's possible with, maybe ADUs, some large ADUs with high
But we
capacity,
really
but
think-
it's mostly electrification. And I
Yeah.
think in that case, the rebates they wouldn't be able to get the rebates at the end of the day. Because for us to use these revenues, it's going to have to be for some sort of a emissions reducing purpose. So that's what we did last year when we talked about this, that there were that for someone who's getting an HVAC permit, for example, that ends up eliminating, a gas use, well, then that was eligible for a rebate. But if it was for some other activity, it wouldn't necessarily be eligible for that rebate.
Okay. So if we use those utilities revenues for reducing fees, one, we're spreading it across a whole bunch of customers. Second, we're incentivizing getting permits. Versus if we applied it in a rebate for the appliance, I guess in that case, they have to get a permit if they're going to get the rebate. Okay.
They do.
Good. All right. So I hadn't thought that through. Yeah.
I will also add that just in that case, if we're trying to create an attractive program, we have to take permitting costs into account regardless anyway. And so when we design the programs, there's a reasonable chance we'd end up having to subsidize the permit anyway.
So we're talking ourselves into this? Yeah, it sounds that way. Okay. In that case, I would make same motion applied to electric service and HVAC permits. And I think if the way it was worded, it would still, the rest would stay the same, that you're going to come up with a dollar amount close to the proposed subsidy amount, right?
I think so.
Yeah.
That should be fine. The only difference is there isn't a state cap in this instance.
Right.
And so it's a choice, but I think as long as you reference the table and the subsidy amount, which basically ranges between, 20 to 50% is what you're looking at.
Yeah, this subject is whether we want to,
wanna
the first one is in response to state cap. The second one is subsidized, we came up with a subsidized cost. Oh, I guess I should have asked a question. Our proposed subsidized costs, have we looked at how they compare with other jurisdictions? Is that how we derived it? How did we come up with that subsidized cost?
So the subsidized cost reflects the removal of that base fee that's applied to each standalone permit. So that's kind of the approach we took to get to those levels. It makes us far more competitive with neighboring jurisdictions.
More closer to what they are?
Right, because we're at the high end on each of these.
And now we would be about where compared?
I would have to actually go back and see where we line up, but we would go from towards the top, towards the middle of the pack.
Okay, so
And
close.
I did want to just clarify to the question of the HVAC systems. So we do now have a new fee, which is the standalone heat pump mechanical. It's under mechanical permits. And that fee is currently set at $328. That's where we're seeing a lot of installs. We've seen 200 through March. So that's the big discrepancy in the figures that are here on this table versus what I cited. They were previously commingled and they've now been disaggregated and split out.
And we don't need to address that because we've already got that covered. Okay, so Christine, I don't know, did you get my motion?
I'll put it on the screen and then I would appreciate some clarification on the difference because the first motion was the difference between city costs and state caps, and there's no state cap here. So I would love clarification. Thank you.
Be just aligned with the proposed subsidized cost in table 2.
Maybe a question for the motion maker. I know a hypothetical climate and sustainability committee, which is totally separate from this, had a lot of comments about how 400 amp panels, maybe we should find ways to increase the cost because of the negative externalities to the grid. That's not in the discussion here, and this is not the best way to increase those costs, but would we be open to admitting the subsidy for
No,
400?
it may be the best way, and it's not a hypothetical group.
Yeah.
We don't have to be.
Yeah. Okay, yeah. Don't have to be cute with the language, but
It does, you said we had 10 of those in this last year. I would actually be game to exclude 400 amp and greater from these subsidies.
Yep. And I just want to confirm with staff, okay, I understand how we took 300-ish off for the base permit costs. It still bothers me a little bit how the HVAC systems for people who are less able to afford it, generally in multifamily homes, as percentage are getting less of a subsidy. I don't know how strongly I feel on this point, but I'm curious if the maker would be open to language that says that the subsidy should be evenly or more evenly distributed across multifamily and single family percentages.
Can I just clarify one point before you answer that, Councilmember Burt? Under the HVAC systems in multifamily and commercial, there is a direct replacement where they're taking the unit just off and putting a new unit on. And then there's additional work with adding a curb or adding a new unit without a curb. And that's where that increased cost really comes into place, is if they're having to add a new curb, there's a lot of structural review aspect. A new curb to support the unit.
Why is it a pad?
A pad, yes. Because most of these commercial situations can be on a roof, right? So that they cut a hole in the roof and they have to create a curb. So that's where that additional cost comes into play.
Could we give, multifamily and sort of commercial can actually be quite different in terms of like roof cutouts versus smaller systems. Is there some way to give the HVAC system subsidy to only multifamily or give a different percentage to multifamily versus commercial?
Maybe I can help this along. Unless you already explained it. well, either way, re-explain it, why the subsidy for the commercial is a lower percentage than the it looks like single family. We didn't even designate it there, but in the first two rows.
Right. So the HVAC systems for single family comes into alignment with the fee for the heat pump, which is both for electric heat pumps and is the standalone residential gas, water and heat space heating equipment fee that was passed by council back in September. So those are set to all be in alignment at that $328 level. For the other ones, it's coming down by the base amount. And so proportionally and percentage wise, it looks like a much different percentage. But what you're seeing is a very similar dollar
Oh,
application.
at the same absolute dollars. I see, that's the answer. And then when we have commercial, that's not per unit. That's for the entire commercial development, right?
Right.
It's for groups of 5. So every group, if you're doing 4, you would pay that price. If you're doing 6, you would pay that price twice.
But the cost per unit is 1/5 of this then. So that's looking at it in a different light.
Right. If 5 are done at once, it would be a much lower cost per unit.
Yes. Okay. So based on that clarification, I think I would keep the motion as is.
I'll second the motion. I'll second the motion as well.
And for total clarification, the way the motion is now, and I apologize if I missed this on the previous one, but it's amending the FY26 muni fee schedule. We are limited by the Fee Mitigation Act here, which anything does take 60 days from the time it's heard at council. So here today, at the beginning of April, this, honestly will be incorporated into the FY27 muni fee schedule and be reflected there. This is nonetheless exactly the policy direction we need to best reflect that into the fee schedule. So it's a very fruitful conversation. I just want to be clear about that. So there's no misalignment.
Good. No, thanks for that. But we have to take this same process the same way. Yep. Okay. Could you call the vote, please?
Councilmember Lowing,
Yes.
Councilmember Burt,
Yes.
Councilmember Lou,
Yes.
motion carries.
Okay, thank you. And then the last one is to propose streamlining of EVCS charges and implementation through the fee process, which is table 3.
But if I heard the committee and staff correctly, this is simply a streamlined process and aligns the cost of the fees with the new cost of providing the service.
Yep.
And to that same end, this would be something to actually change the fee level, requires approval and everything. So we would pursue this refinement through the FY27 muni fee schedule.
Yeah. And to Councilmember Burt's very important point, which I agree with, I'm about to tell you that. Why would we have 307 instead of 300? So unless we want them to know that we really have every dollar calculated in there, but yeah, so 300 and 490 would be okay with me.
Yeah, or whatever round number we kind of,
Yeah, yeah.
in the
Yes.
previous
Yeah.
motion, we
We
gave.
can only round down though,
Yeah.
We can,
for the public's awareness, as we cannot round
Yeah.
up because we cannot be over cost recovery.
and we can incorporate that direction when we present the fees as part of the
Right.
muni fee discussion.
Yeah, you're right. It needs to go 485, not
So as long as the committee is okay with this general direction, I think we'll just bring this forward as part of the 27 muni fee
Okay.
schedule.
So you don't need a motion then?
Nope,
Okay.
coming back to you in all of 4 weeks.
okay. Great. Anything else from the clerk or the staff that we need to address? Thanks for all the staff attendance and work in advance. Big turnout here. Thanks.
In terms of upcoming meetings, there was one thing that came up today that would be an interest in getting update from staff on how the Measure K funds have been used and are being used, and both how much, what's the history, what's the balance, and how they're being used, because I heard some things from staff that I'm not sure was accurate, but whether they were being used for transportation for this San Antonio fund, San Antonio area plan, or the similarly, whether the housing fund was being used for something that was not a clear housing project. So
Sure.
what are
Yeah,
those uses?
Just get an update on that.
That will be part of the proposed budget process in May. So May
Okay,
5th.
so just to make sure that it has that depth when it comes to us.
Sure.
All right, thanks.
Okay, thanks all. We're adjourned.